Hello and welcome to the 27th episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. This week's episode features Ethan Baer. He is the founder and executive director of artist intelligence agency and EDM.com, the largest electronic music publication out there. And I've humbly had the honor to write for it for 2 years. So now I get to speak with the mastermind behind the entire operation. Now, to give you a little bit of a backstory, the founder, Mr. Ethan Baer, is a philosophy major, or was a philosophy major at Colorado College. And during his senior year, he DJ'd and ran an independent music blog called Subsynthesis. After a year, this turned into dubstep.net, which eventually branched out to numerous genres.net. So, for example, house.net, trapmusic.net, electro.net, moonbaton.net, trance.net, etc., etc. Ultimately, they purchased the EDM.com, and they consolidated all of the former names into one single name. This kind of happened during the North American quote-unquote EDM movement, which was kind of early 2013, but Ethan talks about them seeing a lot of traffic during 2011. At the height and peak of SoundCloud, they controlled a network of accounts boasting over 7 million followers and generating over 100 million streams per month from artists around the world. They transformed the promotional network into kind of a joint label and publishing offering after they kind of realized that they were unable to monetize a lot of those streams, and they can turn it into controlling the rights and being able to promote that music that they release through their label. And they currently have a catalog of over 3,500 sound recordings and have worked with over 4,500 different artists and songwriters. Furthermore, they also manage several artists in addition to running EDM.com. So this episode is full of knowledge. If you're looking to become an artist or an electronic artist within this kind of huge hemisphere of music, and learning about what music labels look for and kind of some of the operations that they do behind the scenes and how they make a label work, this is an excellent episode because Ethan tells us exactly kind of what like a one-stop deal is. He tells us about 360 deals. He talks about the major labels, and he shares if blogs and publications, are they going to be kind of relevant within the next 5-10 years. So this is such a great episode. Hell, I even learned a lot from Mr. Ethan. Some things that I guess I didn't know as much about that I thought I did. So I'm very excited for this episode, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with the wealth of information and walking music library, Mr. Ethan Baer.
I'm Ethan, in case anyone doesn't know or it's not included in the information. But I got into this really as a DJ in college. I played DJ sets for different college parties, official parties, some like house parties. And, I did it mostly to like meet new people and share my musical taste and that kind of thing. But it really did, I would say all the way back to middle school, I was always just very much a music discovery person. Like when I first kind of would find a band, I'd go on LimeWire or Kazaa or whatever peer-to-peer site, and I'd download their entire discography. And then I'd find other related bands, and I'd download their entire discography. So from early on, I really loved the process of like finding and listening to new music. And that really translated to my, I don't want to say career, because it certainly wasn't a career, but my time as a DJ. And when I would play these parties, I would just have a lot of friends saying, hey, what was the third song you played? Or, would you be able to make a track list of what you played during that set? And so I launched a website called Subsynthesis, which was also my DJ name at the time. And yeah, I would just put lists of the music that I played in my sets, and I'd write features on some of my favorite artists that I was playing their music. And that site just ended up over time generating enough money that I was like, hey, there's something going on here. I'm going to try and pursue this a little bit and see what happens.
Okay, excellent. And it definitely did translate into something much bigger. Did you kind of expect it to grow to as big as it is now?
No, I had no idea. When I graduated from college, I decided that I would spend a year kind of just like figuring things out, seeing what happened with the site. I was planning on going to law school at that point, and I just didn't want to go from college right back into school. So I was like, I'll take a year and see what happens with this music thing. And by the end of that year, it was paying my bills and I was having a really good time. And, it was by no means anything huge, but it was enough that I had what I needed and I was able to go to all the shows I wanted to. And so from that point, it just kind of continued to grow from there.
Okay. And you said in your description that it's kind of started with the height of the North American EDM movement, which is in 2013. And what kind of explain that movement? What kind of made it a movement? Is it kind of a well-known thing, or is it just kind of a thing that you kind of deemed as?
I would say that we started to get a lot of traction in 2011, which was when a lot of the big dubstep artists sort of started coming over to the US. So the Rusko, Banga, Hatcha, those kind of guys. And so we launched me and my business partner at the time launched a website called dubstep.net and really capitalized on kind of the start of the dubstep movement. And I would say towards the end of 2012, beginning of 2013, that's when the Skrillex wave of things happened. And we wrote this big op-ed on dubstep.net about Skrillex. And he responded and tweeted it out and was sharing it for a while. And at that point, we knew that we needed to expand the model that we were building beyond just dubstep, because it was really clear that the movement had become really an electronic movement and it was going to start evolving and changing a lot, much more quickly than it had previously. So, yeah, I would say for us, the main indicator or the main kind of sign of the change was probably Skrillex.
Okay, and I think, Skrillex is still kind of a pinnacle in electronic music. The memes and the hype of when Skrillex teases a new song, it's still kind of similar to when it all started many, many years ago, 5-6 years ago.
Yes, and I would say a lot of that has to do with when you form a relationship with someone, that relationship tends to have kind of a lasting impact on how you interact with that person in the future. And I think a lot of the people in the dance music scene now, when they first heard Skrillex, they formed that certain bond with him and his music. And now, many years later, when there's new Skrillex music, it kind of triggers that same emotional state from when people had first heard him. So that relationship is a bit frozen in time, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. He seems like such a down-to-earth guy. Seems like very personable, very approachable. And I think that's very important in today's day and age, especially digital realm. And that translation is very important.
I definitely agree. And especially in dance music where touring is so important. At the end of the day, none of these guys are really making money unless they're actively touring. And if you're not able to have positive interactions with your fans and with other managers and with label owners, if you're not able to navigate that scene in a positive way, you're definitely just putting up roadblocks for yourself. And it was that Skrillex really is a good case study for that. The dude networked with everyone, and he's done releases with so many artists in so many different industries. He's toured with so many people. He's collaborated with so many people. And you don't do that by being a jerk. You do that by people liking you and being humble and, showing your respect and admiration for people that do things better than you do and being okay with admitting that. And I think he always really represented that side of the industry. And there's certainly a lot of artists that are very humble and very positive and put out a lot of good energy, but he was definitely kind of like a pioneer in that space within dance music.
Absolutely. He's a pioneer in dubstep. He's a pioneer in dance music, and he's really set the standard high. And I think he's going to go down in history as one of the current modern electronic music.
Right, and music aside, he's a great role model for artists.
Absolutely. So can you from your perspective, can you explain kind of the difference? What have you really seen change in the last 6 years? Because 6 years is not a long time. That's not even a decade, barely a half a decade. But so much has changed about the industry in very many different realms. What have you seen the industry do?
Sure. Well, from the time we started the platform until now, the industry has changed dramatically. Like when we first launched the network, I would still download all the songs. Like we started as a promotional network rather than a record label. So, instead of selling music, we'd reach out to artists and get permission to upload their music to our channels, kind of like a lot of the big YouTube curators do now. And every single song that we wanted to feature, I'd have to torrent it or get the artist to send me the MP3 or download it from some random site. Like streaming wasn't really that much of a thing, especially not like on the Spotify, Apple Music level. So that was really different. Like people still downloaded music. Now no one downloads music. There's really no point. You have offline listening, but no one really downloads music. One of the main things that really helped us grow all of our platforms was that huge trend of like follow to downloads and like to downloads. Like we took advantage of that for 2 to 3 years maybe. And all of that was based on people actually wanting to download songs. And we had millions of downloads that converted to, millions of followers across our SoundClouds, 500,000 on Instagram, like really big numbers across all the platforms that were fueled almost entirely from people downloading music. Now, if you tried to grow your, different social platforms using downloads, you wouldn't really see any results because no one wants to download music. Where would you even put music that you downloaded? So that was a big change. I would say another big change is just copyright and kind of piracy and rights protection online. At the start of the network, one of the main things that we would promote was bootlegs. Bootlegs were still kind of in that space where people considered them acceptable. Like we probably had thousands of bootlegs on our different SoundCloud accounts before SoundCloud started doing takedowns. And I remember the day when they reached out to us and said, we're implementing rights management on the platform now, so you guys probably want to look at kind of removing some of these bootlegs. And I talked with my partner that day, and we realized we had several thousand bootlegs, and we had to go through all of our SoundCloud accounts and delete hundreds of millions of plays off of our accounts to get rid of all this like content that we now realized was illegal. And now, after running a record label and a publishing company for several years, now I understand like why that was illegal and why what we were doing was wrong and like how we should have gone about the process. But at the time, it was kind of just acceptable. Everyone was doing bootlegs. So, the streaming space in general has changed a lot. Bootleg and remix culture has changed a lot. And then in terms of just platform prominence in general, SoundCloud was where independent artists would go to build their audience, and it was really, really effective for discovery of new artists. And, all of the A&Rs that I worked with at various labels, like everyone was using SoundCloud as their main way of digging and discovering new music. It was so good for that. And, as a platform, it was just so good for the independent artist community. And at one point, I think it was like 2014, 2015, around the time that they started trying to monetize, they just started catering to the major labels, and they revised the charts and made it so that the charts, weren't really particularly organic anymore. And like certain media platforms were prevented from getting in the charts. Like they really just changed the way that the platform worked to benefit major labels and major artists and people with huge budgets much more significantly, which was a shame because it really grew up as a user-generated, independent artist-centric platform, and it kind of just turned into another streaming platform that plays what the major labels pay them to run. Like I get push notifications from SoundCloud all the time now, and almost all of them are for the new major label hip-hop songs. That's about it. That's pretty much exclusively what I get push notifications from SoundCloud for. The new Trippie Redd album or the new, Lil Uzi Vert album. And I don't have any problem with that music, but I don't know if I've ever seen an electronic record get a push notification through SoundCloud. So it's clear that a lot of these platforms are like struggling to figure out how to embrace independent artists, but at the same time, how to, one, avoid the wrath of the major labels, while at the same time, like, they want the major labels to be happy with them, because collectively, I think it's something like 75% of the world's music is owned by the majors. So like if you don't play ball with them, that's, you know, more than 2/3, that's like 3/4 of the music industry that you can't have on your platform. So, you know, it's a very interesting space, and I don't think any of the streaming platforms have really figured out how to be a positive space for independent artists to really achieve success on a level that matters, while at the same time, you know, playing ball with the majors, so to speak. And I don't think anyone's really figured out how to do that yet.
I think the music or the major labels are very hard to play ball with, because I've written articles about, and I've read articles about, the major labels are starting to struggle. In today's age, with the music industry turning to be a lot of independent artists, a lot of independent releases, artists are starting their own labels, they're releasing independently. I think the major labels are starting to get a little scared. So do you think this fight with you know, kind of playing ball with the major labels and like SoundCloud kind of almost selling out to these major labels and really pushing them, do you think it's the major labels kind of getting a little scared and they're trying to frantically find something to stay relevant?
I mean, it's like, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think it's tempting to think that way, because it kind of is like a ray of hope, so to speak. But I think that they're like less desperate than you think. You know, there's definitely a shift in the way major labels are kind of conducting business in general. There's much more 360 and artist development deals, and a focus on like, I don't know how much you know about 360 deals, but in the past, you know, there's licenses where artists will license their album to a label for 5 years or whatever, or they'll do an assignment where the label owns the copyright forever. But now, you know, labels think of themselves much more as not just someone that like puts out music, because the process of putting out music isn't difficult anymore. It used to be you'd have to press vinyl and ship it to all these different, you know, retail outlets all over the country, and have someone that goes to all the Best Buys and Tower Records and make sure the displays are right and all of that. And now, you know, that basic level, you just send your music to your distributor and they put it all on all the DSPs and all the retail platforms. So that part is, there's nothing there anymore. So it becomes more of like a brand development partnership where the label really steps in and helps build the artist's brand rather than just promoting a couple pieces of music. However, the flip side of that is, now that they've helped build the artist's brand, they're entitled to, or they believe they're entitled to, you know, it's debatable, to touring revenue and, you know, television appearances and book deals. The idea being, we helped build your brand and you're only getting these book deals and you're only able to tour because we put out the music that you were able to use as essentially a marketing apparatus to get on the road. So I think a lot of like the downturn in just like streaming numbers or sales, I think they're making up for by doing that. And I think people also underestimate the amount of money that the majors are able to extract from all of these new tech platforms and how they're able to do it. You know, from one little example that I'll give, which is, it's kind of just like a random example, but I think it's very kind of apropos of how this works. But I went to EDM Biz, I think in 2014, which was SFX's like music industry conference before EDC. And one of the main things that I noticed there, so I'm walking through all the different booths and meeting the different people that are, you know, demoing their different products or different ideas. And there was this one lady who had a product that's, are you familiar with Musical.ly?
Yes, I am.
So it was originally like a kind of like karaoke. It's like a combination of Snapchat and like karaoke and lyric videos or something, you know. But I met this girl who had a similar concept, and basically, you know, you would pick a song and it would show the lyrics on the screen and you'd sing along with it. And I asked her, you know, how are you getting the rights to the music for this platform? And she said, oh, well, I reached out to Sony and Universal. I don't remember if those were the two that she mentioned, but she, you know, name dropped the two of the major labels. and was like, yeah, and they said that they really loved what I was doing and they were willing to, whitelist my platform so that I could use the music for free. And they said that I can continue doing that for a while. And I was like, okay, well, what does a while mean? And she's like, well, they didn't really specify. And a couple months later, she reached out to me and said that the labels had come back and demanded a very high, I think they either asked for a really high licensing fee or a percentage of her company. And that's very typical. Ultimately they're well aware that they control the majority of the music industry. And so doing things like, hey, you're a new platform and I like what you're doing, so I'm going to allow you to use all of our music, but once you achieve success using our music, we're going to come back and either we're going to pull the rug out from underneath you, or we want a big piece of your company. And at that point, they're not even making money from the music. They're making money from this random venture that they essentially strong-armed because of the leverage that they have as a result of their music. So whether or not they're getting more desperate, I don't really know if I can speak to that. But whether or not their tactics are evolving and starting to expand beyond just the model of like sign a song, push it to the radio, get the artist on tour, do like radio promo shows, like that model isn't as effective anymore. So they're doing other things. That's kind of that would be the most that I would be able to say, and to really give you like much more insight on like these guys are doing really well and these guys are not. They kind of conceal all of that. It's difficult to really get too deep into that without talking to them yourself.
Right. And that's actually kind of scary, because that's an interesting tactic, but at the same time, they probably did it all legally. It's
completely legal. There's nothing illegal about it. It's just very aggressive.
Yeah. Because they own the right. It's like me letting you borrow my car for making the money, driving for Uber. And then you know what? You get back. It's actually, I want $80 of that $100 you made. You use my car. It's a similar thing, but it's sneaky. And like you had mentioned,
I would use the word predatory because they're not clear up front with what their tactic is, right? And of course, that's to be expected, but they're allowing people to use their content for free, knowing that that's their best chance to be successful. And then if they do succeed, they come back around and demand, more than they probably would have gotten otherwise, which, look, these people, like, for example, the lady that designed that app, they're putting themselves in a position where they're at the mercy of the label in order to continue their success, right? So you can't really blame the label per se, but at the same time, it is a relatively predatory tactic.
Yeah, it is. It's somewhat from a business standpoint, it's somewhat genius, but from a consumer or a new business owner, it's very, like you said, predatory and unfair. It's kind of sad that they're not clear up front, but at the same time, they're the ones massively benefiting from it. So why would they say something like that when it could potentially shoot them in the foot?
Exactly.
And so it's interesting. I didn't really know that the major labels had. I knew they had power, but I didn't know they had that much power still, because I see so many independent releases. I see and so many independent labels, and everything's going independent these days. But at the same time, these independent labels and releases are somehow tied to a major label somewhere.
Right. That's the other thing about like independent artists, and I'm doing air quotes while I say that.
Air quotes.
I could hear your kind of voice.
Yeah, you can hear my fingers.
Yeah, your fingers.
A lot of people that say they're independent, I don't know if they really believe they're independent or not. If they do, obviously not all independent artists fall into this category, but a very large amount of independent labels and independent artists are actually signed or distributed by the majors. It's just through a hierarchy of different companies, right? So like, I'm trying to remember which label. I think Insomniac Records, they have their label, and then they have a bunch of artist labels underneath them now. I think Universal distributes them, but I'm not 100% sure. That's just like one example, though. Like Spinnin' Now, I believe, is owned by Warner. So there's a lot of these labels especially in the hip hop space, like an artist will start a label and they'll sign a bunch of other artists and release their music. And those artists that are being signed to that label might believe that they're doing an independent release, but that the head artist who started that label actually did a deal with Sony where they're distributing and doing the marketing for their releases. So a lot of people that think they're independent aren't actually independent, and either they really do believe it and they're just misguided, or they're saying that they're independent because that's a marketing strategy, and people, like fans, are more inclined to support people that they think are independent and aren't part of a machine. It's kind of like the negative stigma around like the idea of selling out. It's very much like that. Like being independent is like the opposite of selling out, right? It's you're representing yourself and you're going right to your fans, and there's something like intimate about that and more personal about that fans are attracted to. So generally when I see people saying they're independent, I just assume that they're not. Which isn't necessarily fair, because there are a lot of artists that really are releasing their music independently, but it's much less common than you would think based on like seeing what artists say.
Right. Okay, so the kind of backpedaling a little bit, the major labels, I believe it was, I don't remember which article it was, but I'll have to put it in the show notes. I read that the major labels last year made just under $7 billion just from streaming alone. So Universal, Warner, and Sony combined made just under $7 billion. That is insane, just from streaming revenue, which is insanity. And then kind of coming back into the independent artists, and like I'm doing air quotes as well. So when you say independent, you literally have to take the word for exactly what it means, is independent. If somebody goes out on their own and they say, yeah, I'm independent now, but your mom is still somehow giving you money here, and then grandma's giving her money to give to you, that is not fully independent.
Right. So you're using like the college grad example and comparing them to an artist, where you get out of college and you move into your own house and you say you're independent, but you're still spending your parents' money on groceries and your cell phone bill and your car insurance and your health insurance and whatever else. It's like you're not actually independent. You might live by yourself, but someone else is paying for everything still.
Yeah.
And that's very similar to what's going on. You know, they might not be signed to a label, and they might not be signed to, they might not have a booking agent or whatever, but their label is putting them on tour with their other artists, and the label is handling all the distribution. So like there are other people that are still facilitating all the things that cost money, but they live in their own house. Like that analogy is actually pretty good. By the way, just to follow up on the previous point, so Insomniac Records is a co-branded partnership with Interscope, so Universal.
Okay. So, and like you said there, you've got Universal, then you've got Interscope, then you've got Insomniac, and then you've got all these sub-labels.
Right, and then you have Bass Rush and BassCon and Dream State and Good Music and all the different artists. I think Dr. Fresh just did one, The Prescription. I think it has to do with Insomniac Records, but I'm not 100% sure. But that's just another example. So like an artist that's signed to Dr. Fresh's label might think, oh, I'm independent. This is an independent label, not realizing that label is signed to Insomniac, and Insomniac is signed to Interscope, and Interscope is signed to Universal Music Group. So it really oftentimes they might really genuinely believe that they're independent, not understanding that going up the chain of command, they're really not.
Right. Because there's a huge daisy chain there, and that chain can go 10, sometimes 12 layers deep, I can imagine.
Absolutely.
How would something like this, so let's say an artist, let's say you or I sign with Dr. Fresh's label, and there's, that many layers. How does that affect one's royalties? Does that go, if you sign with Dr. Fresh's label and you get that contract and they're going to take a percentage of your royalties and this and that. Well, does the Insomniac take a percentage, and then does...
Typically, that's not how it works. And obviously, it differs between labels, and I couldn't really speak to all of the deals that they have. But in general... the way it works is the artist is entitled to their share of the royalties, whether that's 50% or 20%, whatever it says in the contract. And then that whole daisy chain that you were talking about, like Interscope and then Insomniac Records and then all the other ones, usually what happens is say, for example, Universal will take 20% of anything that any of their sub-labels release. But that comes out of, as far as I know, that comes out of the label's share, not out of the artist's share. Again, that might be different from label to label. They might take it off the top. So let's say this label generates $10, right? And Dr. Fresh's label is entitled to half of it, to 50%, and the artist is entitled to 50%. But Universal takes 20% off the top, right? So then that would mean that the 10 would become 8, and the 8 would be split between Dr. Fresh's label and the other artist. So I think it just depends on what label and which sub-label and which imprint, and also on the artist deal. But I believe that the majority of the time it comes out of the label's share, not out of the artist's share.
Okay, so it's not like a big daisy chain where the artists say may make $1,000 on a release and then at the end of the day get $5.
Yeah, I don't think that that's the case. Like I said, it might be in some circumstances. Yeah. I'm sure it is in some circumstances. You know, there's a lot of crazy label deals out there.
Yeah.
But I would say for the most part, I don't think that's how it works. I don't run a major label, so I wouldn't be able to say for sure. But from my experience, no, it doesn't. Each one of the tiers of labels isn't sucking off all the money, so that there's nothing left for the person at the bottom.
Okay.
One thing though that people it's pretty common to see artists, even major artists, complaining about their streaming revenue on Spotify or on Apple Music or any of the platforms, and they'll do things like they'll list the total number of streams they have, and then they'll say, you know, my label contract says that I get 50%. So if there were this many streams and it's worth this much per stream, I should have technically made this much money, but I only made this much money instead. So what's wrong? Did my label screw me? Did Spotify screw me? Who screwed me? And, you know, there's a lot of different reasons stuff like that can happen. But as a label that doesn't screw over artists ever, I'm very familiar with people bringing that problem to me and genuinely not understanding. And there's so many factors that go into the process of artists getting paid, right? So I'm not sure how familiar you and your listeners are with the process of recoupment, but it's very much what it sounds like. Generally, a label will allocate, X amount of dollars for a marketing budget, and then that money has to be made back before the artist is going to make money, right? The expenses have to be recouped before money can be paid out. And a lot of artists don't really think about that when it comes to, okay, well, where's this, why am I not getting this money, right? So there might be 1 million streams, and those 1 million streams might equal $4,000. And if you're entitled to 50%, you should be getting $2,000. However, you're not mentioning the fact that the music video cost $4,000 to make. So you're lucky to make $1 because of the high expenses that you had there. So there's just there's a lot of lack of understanding when you see artists complaining about what they're getting paid. And I'm not saying that the streaming platforms don't take advantage of artists. The whole thing that's going on with Spotify and Amazon trying to block the Music Modernization Act and trying to make it so that they can't raise the rate that songwriters get paid. That's very conniving and very inappropriate. And it's a very clear example of them not caring about artists. But at the same time, there's so many artists that just take a very outspoken position about getting conned or about not getting paid the right amount. And most of the time, I would say, it might not be what they deserve, but they are getting paid what they're supposed to be getting paid, and they just don't understand, which is, that is unfortunate. And it's, ideally, management and the label and their lawyer would have better explained how the process works to them. But unfortunately, that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, and that's a good point as to why you should always have a very good lawyer on standby, just to make sure that these things don't happen and all this kind of stuff doesn't fall through the crack.
But at the same time, things like recoupment, you'll be really hard-pressed to find a label that doesn't recoup expenses, right? Because otherwise, why would you ever market a release if you didn't know that you could make back the money you spent marketing it, right? So the idea behind recoupment is look, we're down to put $10 million marketing this release, but if the track makes 12 million, we're keeping the first 10 million to make back what we spent. And you'd be really hard pressed to find a label that's not going to recoup. That's very much industry standard. But yes, as you were saying, not having at least a basic understanding of the terms that are in recording contracts is not good. You should definitely educate yourself as an artist And as a manager, you should definitely educate yourself. And even then, especially as you get further along in your career and your music is worth more, it's really, really smart to have a lawyer look over these agreements. Because, I mean, just look at the news and you'll constantly see artists suing their labels and labels suing artists and artists suing other artists about this same stuff that, for the most part, could have been avoided by just understanding what you're signing.
And I've mentioned this in a few previous episodes. I've actually had an intellectual property lawyer on the podcast. We've contributed a couple articles and very good features to EDM.com as well about this very topic and how it is so important for artists to understand just kind of music 101. Like, you should take a music 101 class. You should understand what a copyright is and what your rights are as a copyright owner. And knowing, this is still blows my mind that so many people don't know this, is that you can't take somebody else's sample and make it your own and use it in your own song. That's not how this works. And like Davey had said in the article and the podcast, is like, that's like me taking your car and putting new rims on it. It's still my car.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's still, those are your rims. Sure, what you did to it, it might be your art or whatever, but that's still my car.
Right.
So it's a very similar situation, and it still blows my mind to go on YouTube videos. And I explained this to Davey in one of the podcast episodes that I was on YouTube once and somebody had responded and they're like, hey, who owns the copyright to this? And it was like a mashup of some Skrillex song and I don't remember who else, Joyride or something like that. And it was a mashup. And somebody's like, well, who owns the copyright to this? I want to use this. And somebody had responded like, oh, the channel uploader. No, not at all. There's like 3 different songs in here. So there's like 6 different copyright owners potentially. So it's like, no, not really. So unfortunately, that's not how this works. I wish it was a little easier.
Cover songs add a whole nother level of complexity to that.
And kind of going back a little bit, it reminded me of a good conversation I had with a colleague of mine just last week. And he's in the rap scene and hip hop world, and he's working on starting his own business and managing some artists and whatnot. And we were talking about how Drake did the music video for, I believe it was God's Plan, where he took the almost $1 million for the music video that the label gave him to make the music video. And he went out and he spent it on, buying groceries and school supplies for kids around in Miami. And with an artist like Drake, he can easily make that back. Hell, he could just write a check right then and there and just pay for it right himself. He's not too worried about it. But for an artist like, say, myself, who may have this smashing release, if an artist or if a label were to come to me and said, hey, this is a really good song, we're going to market this, we want to give you $1 million to market this, would that be a red flag for an artist? Or is that a good deal, the more money they want to give you? Or is that kind of a red flag?
I would not say it's a red flag. But I would say it's something that, like, you really want to see the context of why they're willing to put up that kind of money, right? Is it because you're a huge artist already and they think, oh, it's going to be easy to make our money back? In your case, no, right? You're obviously, no offense, but you're not someone that they would come to and say, oh, just your name is going to guarantee that we're going to make back that money, right? So you have to think, okay, well, why are they willing to give me this much money up front? And then you also want to look at other terms like, okay, they're giving me $1 million, but if the song doesn't make $1 million, what happens, right? What happens after that? Do they, was it a label? Was it like a 5-album deal where now I'm tied to them for my next 5? Usually with a big advance like that for a small artist, they're going to want a lot in return, right? So it's probably not just going to be a single song. It's probably going to be like, okay, they see some promise in me, so they're willing to put some money into this project, but they want my next 5 albums, right? 5 albums or 20 years or whatever the terms are. And there's something called cross-collateralization, which means, let's say they give you $1 million advance for a release, right? And that release flops. And then you put out another album and it does really well. If cross-collateralization is in that contract, they can take the money from your album and use it to pay off what they need to recoup from that single. So they can use your different releases to pay off expenses from other ones, which, again, from the label's perspective, that's fair because they put up $1 million and it flopped and they need to make that money back somewhere. But as a, relatively undiscovered artist, now you're locked up for 5 full albums, which in your career, you may never put out that many, right? So you may be tied up with them for the rest of your career and you're never able to get past that advance. So your artist career is pretty much dead in the water at that point, right? You're never going to make back that $1 million. And, you can't take your music anywhere else. So that's an example of like, okay, the $1 million is in there because they want to lock me up for a long time because they see some promise. But the downside is if that promise doesn't pan out, I've been shelved essentially. So yeah, there's just different things to look at. Another thing that's important to note is that the percentage of income for most artists, I believe. It's somewhere, like I'm making up these numbers, but I read it very recently. It's somewhere around 80% of a successful artist's revenue comes from touring. And like 13% comes from their like streaming and sales. And then the other small percent comes from a mix of everything else, merch, live appearances on TV shows, book deals, all the other random stuff that you can make money from as a famous person, essentially, right? And when there's such a big chunk of it, when there's like 3/4 of your revenue coming from touring, that's something that's really important to keep in mind for an artist when looking at label deals. So one of the things I hear a lot from artists, especially early stage artists, is we're never willing to assign our copyrights to anyone, or we're never willing to sign our publishing to anyone, even on a single track. Or, they get the idea that like certain words like perpetuity and, they get this thing in their head where certain words are evil. And if they ever see those words in a music contract, they're just not going to sign it, right? But at the end of the day, especially for like bass music artists, for example, I would say bass music artists, the 70-20 like thing where it's like 70% is from touring and 20% is from music and the 10% or whatever is for other things. For bass music artists, I might even say it's closer to like 85% of it from successful bass music artists comes from touring, maybe even more. So when you're looking at the terms of release contracts, if I was a dubstep artist and some label offered to give me $1 million advance to like make a music video and put the release out, I would think to myself, I don't care if this song ever makes any money because that's not the point. All that money being put into this track is going to make me big enough that an agent will pick me up and I can start touring and actually make money. So then in that case, the thing that would have been important is where are they collecting the money in return for that advance? Are they just able to recoup that money from album sales and streams, or are they going to be collecting it from your touring revenue and your merch and all of those other things, right? If you can get that $1 million to pay for your release and they can only recover it from the release, who cares? You know what I mean? I hate to say it as a label owner, but like, who cares if you screw over the label? You got like good marketing on one of your releases, and that marketing was enough that now booking agents are interested in you, right? So a lot of people, especially early stage artists, are way more protective of their music than they need to be. And I try and explain that to them by saying like, ultimately, if you're going to have a successful career as a dance music artist and you think that that's going to come from streaming, you might as well do something else because it's just not going to happen. And that's like kind of like a frustrating thing for a lot of artists that don't want to tour or just don't really think they're cut out for touring. But it is really hard to make a real living, like a viable living off of just streaming music. Like I was saying earlier on, you'll see huge pop stars making posts like, I don't understand why my label is screwing me and I only got $4,000 for this hit that got 100 million views or whatever. There's just no money in streaming, really. Like, yes, there is money, but I think the number that you quoted before was like 6 or 7 billion for the entire industry. That ain't shit. That's nothing compared to the touring industry at large. There's just so little money there spread between so many people, and all the labels have their hands in it, and the managers have their hands in it, and the publishers have their hands in it, and the streaming platforms have their hands in it. It's just there's so little there that I always tell our artists, you got to think of your music as not just only this, but you really got to think of your music and the marketing and everything that you do around it as essentially promotional tools for getting yourself on the road.
Interesting.
And because of that, I think label deals matter a lot less than people think they do, especially in the certain segments of music where touring is much more important.
Yeah. That's very interesting. And like you said, I can't, I mean, electronic, I don't know many big electronic artists today that don't tour. I mean, you almost have to tour, like you had said, in the electronic music scene, because there's just not.
You wouldn't be putting the word big before them if they weren't touring, right?
No, honestly, like Skrillex would not be Skrillex if he didn't tour. Skrillex would not be Skrillex if he didn't show up at festivals. Jaws would not be Jaws if he didn't show up at festivals.
Exactly. How many huge artists can you think of that don't tour? I'm sure you can think of maybe a couple, but it's very few and far between. That's where artists that's where they earn their stripes. The music gets you there, but that's where the real money comes. That's where the attention comes. That's where you build your brand.
And that's why it's important to kind of come back to Skrillex, set that good example of being a good human being and not being a piece of shit when you're on tour and you're meeting all these people that really can make an impact on your career.
Yep.
Going back a little bit, we talked about royalties and copyrights. You own a big label, and you deal with, was it 35 artists or 4,500 artists so far?
Between 3,500 and 4,000 artists, yeah.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit about how royalties work from a label's perspective and from your perspective, and then how do copyrights kind of factor into that, and how you can use copyrights and copyright ownership to your advantage to make more royalties?
Sure. So let's break it down into the two questions and kind of answer them one by one. So the first thing that you asked was, can you talk a little bit more about royalties? Yes, absolutely. But before I just kind of start pontificating about it, do you have any specific questions that you think I should answer first, or?
Nothing in particular. Just from your perspective as a label owner, what just maybe some of the things you've seen that are good and some of the things that are bad when it comes to royalties, whether it be working on a deal or whatever it may be.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess one of the things I would start out with is, like I said before, I think one of the biggest problems right now, especially with emerging artists, is just kind of a general lack of understanding of how publishing works and how master recordings work and how they should be looking at their royalties and what the value is of ownership. And what I mean by that is a lot of artists kind of come at us from the perspective of, okay, I'd love to work with you guys because you can, promote my music, but, how can we do that and I retain all of my copyright? And it's okay, well, the reason that doesn't make sense is because the label is the artist makes the music and it's the label's job to get the music out to the world. And the reason that an artist comes to a record label is because they're not capable of doing that on their own, right? They believe by signing to the label that the label is more capable of disseminating that music than they are, right? So that's why there's a royalty split. It's a partnership. A label is partnering with an artist. Another thing that comes up a lot is publishing. So the general kind of common, I don't want to say urban myth, but the common knowledge for artists is that you don't ever want to sign your publishing away, right? You want to keep all your publishing because you never know when it's going to be valuable someday in the future. And I'm sure that some people will disagree with me on this, but I don't think there's anything that's a bigger load of nonsense than that. And I guess the simplest way I would explain it is, okay, would you rather own 100% of nothing or 50% of something, right? So publishing, yes, there are mechanicals from music downloads. There is this very small amount that's being paid out from streams. There is money on the publishing side from music online, but almost non-existent. And now that Spotify and Amazon are aggressively trying to block the the songwriter portion of the Music Modernization Act, that's only getting potentially worse. So when I explain publishing to artists, I say, okay, I understand that you're coming from this position where you believe that you should just hold on to all of your rights, but do you know where the money actually comes from on the publishing side? And they're no, I have no idea. So then we explain sync rights to them, right? How do you get a sync license? Where is the money coming from? Largely from synchronization, right? And that happens when a movie studio or a video game studio or a music supervisor or some sort of entity that wants to use your music in synchronization with video reaches out, right? And something that a lot of people don't know is a lot of times the music is the very last component of a video game or a commercial or a movie. And oftentimes the music supervisor is given a budget in a week and told, get us a song in the next week or you're fired, basically. And so they have like a crazy, list of things that the director or whoever wants the music to sound like. And it'll be like, we want something that's rebellious and at the same time calming, and it could be deep house or it could be dubstep, right? So they have this like ridiculous brief that doesn't really mean anything. And then they just come to a bunch of partners and say, we need some music that fits this description in the next 24 hours. And if you can't do it in 24 hours, then don't bother, right? And the way a sync license works is when that music supervisor wants to license a song from you, they need a sign off from both the label and the publisher on that piece of music, right? And if, let's say there's 4 artists on a song, right? And all of those artists are signed to the label, but each one of them has their own publisher, or each one of them is self-published, right? Well, then when, EA Sports comes to me to license this song for their new NHL hockey video game, they say, okay, well, we need the sign off from the publisher and the record label. And then I'll respond, hey, there's 4 publishers because each one of the artists is self-published. Usually the music supervisor will say, screw it. I'd rather just go to someone that owns both sides. And that's what's called one stop. So yeah, that's another point that I really push with artists is like, we're going to go out there and we're going to pitch your music to movie studios and different music supervisors. And we're going to try and get your music placed in video games and commercials. However, if you own the publishing, we can't really do that. It's very difficult because then if the music supervisor comes and we give them the thumbs up and we email you and you don't respond for 24 hours, we just lost a deal. That could have been a $50,000 sync deal that we lost because we are counting on the artist to respond to an email. It's like we don't want to count on other people to do that. We know that we're capable of it and we want to be able to do that service for our artists. So the way that we handle that is most publishers want to sign an artist, right? They want to sign the artist so that they own that artist publishing, not just that song, but the artist, right? They publish that artist. The way we do everything is on essentially one-off deals. So we might do an EP or we might do an album or we might do a single, but the deal only pertains to that particular body of music. It doesn't pertain to anything that they make in the future or anything that they made in the past. So the way it works is we want the artist to assign the copyright to us on both the master and the publishing side, which means we own the track outright on both sides. The artist is entitled to their royalty split, which every royalty split we do is 50% for the artist, 50% for the label, across the board. But we want them to assign the copyrights to us. And the main reason for that is we want to be one-stop. We're very aggressive about trying to get as many sync deals as possible for our artists, and we've had a lot of success doing it. But the ones that always fell through were the ones where we weren't the publisher and the record label, and we were depending on someone else to follow up. And their lack of response or their lack of promptness ends up scuttling the deal. So I think the biggest thing about royalties, and I can talk more about like how we handle paying them out and all of that. But I think the biggest thing about music royalties is just like understanding what that actually means and what the benefits of ownership are and what ownership allows you to do and what not having ownership over your music, like what are the cons of that? What are the pros of that? I feel like most artists just don't understand. Like almost every single artist that we have the publishing conversation with, I have to walk them through that same, like, do you want 100% of nothing or 50% of something? Because like that artist isn't going to go to the music supervisor at EA Sports and say, hey, I want to put this song in your new NHL hockey game, right? They're going to come to us because we have an established relationship with them and we've successfully done a lot of licenses with them, right? So we're able to bring, let's say that one deal is a $1,000 deal, right? For just sake of simplicity. We can get that artist 50% of $1,000, right? Or they could get themselves 100% of $0. So, obviously, like in theory, could the artist go out and get their own deals? Sure. Are they as likely to as us? Absolutely not, especially considering that the vast majority of artists that we work with are in the small to like emerging artist phase, meaning they don't have those relationships yet. You know, we're not asking to sign their publishing as an artist. We don't want to own everything they put out in the next 10 years. We just want to own that one track so that we can get them the most money possible out of it.
That's excellent. And I think that clears up a lot of questions that even I had. We're like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So going back a little bit, you said that you like to have the publishing and the master rights to both, to the song. So in that stance, what are the rights for an artist in that song? Let's say a music supervisor comes to them, or a small film wants to come to them and get that song. Do they have any rights in that? Or being that the copyright has been assigned to you, they have no control over that?
You're saying if the licensor goes straight to the artist rather than coming to us?
Right. Or what if the artist went to a music supervisor and they actually were interested in publishing that? Do they have any...
The artist would not be able to do that. They would have to, they would forward it to us and we would handle the deal for them. But think about it from this perspective, right? Signing a contract, a recording contract, is pretty complicated for an artist, right? And we were talking about how they should have their lawyer involved and how their manager should be educated in all of that. Like, it's a complicated document, right? And a licensing agreement for a song with a major studio like EA Sports or something like that is it's the same thing. It's another very voluminous, complicated, detail-oriented document that, do we really want the artist going and trying to do those deals in the first place? Is that really even in their best interest? Like, you'd be really hard-pressed to find a big pop star that doesn't have a publisher. And ultimately, it's because, one, the publisher's job is to get them good deals, and two, you don't really want to deal with that shit. As an artist, you have a lot more to deal with than worrying about your publishing, you know? Like, is it valuable for, let's say, we do have some artists that, for example, might be really close with some brand that's doing a bunch of internet advertising, and that brand wants to do a micro sync, meaning like micro syncs are small value licenses, usually for things like online advertising, right? So some brand that sells cars in Japan will pay us $250 for using a song for 3 weeks in their YouTube commercials only in Southeast Asia, right? So that would be considered a micro sync. And sometimes artists might have a friend that does something like that, and they'll just email me and they'll say, hey, my friend wants to, license this music. Can you facilitate this? And we have a team that will immediately respond and facilitate that and get the deal done, rather than the artist having to go and find a lawyer and like maybe not sign the deal well and like, not know how to negotiate terms. As the record label and the publisher, we have a lot of leverage to negotiate, right? So the artist trying to negotiate and get the best deal is not going to get them the same kind of deal that us negotiating on their behalf is going to get them. We have clout, we have leverage from all of our other music. We have, kind of like we were talking about before, where the major labels are able to say to these, new technology and app companies like, hey, use our music for free, but if you're successful, we'll come back for you. We have a similar type of leverage with the licensors. It's like, okay, well, you've licensed 20 tracks from us in the past and we'd love to continue working together, but we need to know that you're, going to continue paying us fairly. So we'll license this to you, but we need this amount on both sides. We need this amount for the license on the record label side, on the sound recording side, and we need this much on the composition or the publishing side. So one, relationships. We're much more likely to have relationships for valid and useful license opportunities. Two, negotiating. We're much more capable of negotiating on their behalf, and that's what we're set up to do. And three, technicalities. Like, licenses are really complicated. There's a lot to it. It's just like a recording contract where there's a lot of, seemingly ambiguous and confusing clauses and, things that cover certain territories and durations. And it's just a lot that, why would the artist want to worry about that when someone else can do it for them?
And just kind of sit back and collect the money.
Yeah, exactly. They can just sit back and collect the money. And if they happen to know someone that is a music supervisor or works at a video game studio or something, all they have to do is do an intro and we'll take care of it. We're not just going to scuttle the opportunity because we didn't find it, because it benefits us as well, right?
So it kind of sounds like a win-win situation for the artist, because you've got a whole team that's ready on standby to push your music, grow your name, and make you as successful as possible with that release. And you just start seeing money coming in.
Right. And then if they weren't happy, they can go and do their next release with a different label and a different publisher, because we're not trying to lock them in, you know?
Right.
We just want to make sure that we have full control in order to do what's best for that particular release. And that's it, you know? If we've had a lot of artists come through our label that are now very successful touring artists, and they maybe did one release with us and they maybe did 20, but we didn't try and lock them in, and now they're either on a major or, you know, heavily touring, or, you know, I'm not going to go through a list of names of all these artists, but
Right.
we've definitely seen a lot of people come through and become very successful and then move on to other labels, and that's fine. You know, that's the proof in the pudding of our model, which is, look, you might feel like we're being restrictive or overly controlling for this one release, but you just got to kind of let that go, because especially as an emerging artist, right? As an artist who doesn't have a hit record out yet, you really should be approaching production from the perspective of every release that I put out should be better than the one before it, right? So if you're worried about losing out on that one release that you made really early in your career, then that's not a good sign, because you clearly don't believe in yourself and you don't think that the next track you make is going to be better, right? You don't believe that you're improving, which, you know, if that's the case, you probably should re-explore why you're an artist and, like, you know, what your goals are as being an artist and what you want to do in the music industry, because you really should be focused on improving, right? And if you're worried about the past, you're not thinking about now and in the future.
Right. So these artists that they're signing away the copyright and the publishing and everything over to you guys, so you can do whatever you can and kind of be, was it that one stop? Is that what they call it?
Correct.
Okay. So you're kind of like a one stop for everything. And say in 10 years you might license that song again.
Correct. And the artist would see their money for it.
Right. So it's kind of like, and how long does that happen? Is it in the deal that an artist can see those royalties, or is there kind of like a thing where, oh, we own the copyright because the copyright lasts for 70 years of the owner, it was the life of the owner and then 70 years. So how would something like that work? Where, because you own a company, the company could go on forever.
So wait, what exactly was your question? How would it work if we got a sync offer for a song that we released this year, 50 years from now?
Yeah, let's throw that out there, a hypothetical situation like that.
Sure. So like I said, we have 3,500 something artists, and all of them have what's called an account balance, right? So we get our payments from all the DSPs and from our licensing partners. DSPs meaning the digital service providers. So like Spotify, Apple Music, Lime, you know, all the different retail platforms and streaming platforms. They pay us as the label, and then we process all the money that they pay us, so we can figure out, okay, all of this money goes to this artist, and all of this money goes to this artist. We've built essentially a QuickBooks for music royalties that we use for essentially taking all of that raw data that the distributors give us and figuring out who all that money is entitled to, what the royalty withholding rates are for different countries, what the exchange rates are, what the mechanical withholding rates are. So we process all of that information, and at the end of every quarter, if an artist's account balance is over $100, they're entitled to a report that shows them exactly how much they're owed, where all that money came from. Our reports are broken down by territory, by period, by song, by retail platform. So the artist really has all of the data that explains like where that money came from. And if they're over $100, they get that money, and we'll pay it out by PayPal or check or ACH or whatever is simplest for the artist. And if you release a track with us and in 100 years from now, somehow I'm still alive and your account balance is now over $100, as long as we can find you, you'll get that money.
Okay, so does it go by your life, or how does it go by when you send it? Because the copyright lasts for the
life of the artist. I was just saying, like, if I'll make sure that you get your royalties if I'm still alive, but if I'm not, whoever my successor is will make sure you get your money.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't mean that if I die, we'll suddenly stop paying artists. That was not what was implied there.
Yeah, because who knows when that could be, you know? So that's interesting, and I know that's kind of a thing with.
Yeah, artists getting paid has nothing to do with me being alive.
Okay, yeah.
Do you think that these types of like non-exclusive deals are a good thing in today's age, or do you think that artists should be signing more exclusive deals? I mean, it always depends on
I don't like to say that one is better than the others because it is so contextual. Like, for example, a lot of artists really like jumping around from label to label and getting exposed to lots of different audiences and tapping into different ecosystems. Each label has strengths in different territories. People release with, for example, they might do a release with some labels in Italy and some labels in the UK and some labels in Australia. That way they're able to tap into all of those different markets because those labels are obviously strong at marketing in those areas, right? So I know a lot of artists that take that approach and then they use that leverage that they have, fans in all those different territories to then book tours based on the countries with the labels that they've released with. So in that case, if it's a relatively DIY project and the manager is capable and they have an agent that's willing to like put in the work to help build out those markets, in that case, you might not need an exclusive deal, On the other hand, there are artists that there's one label that really fits their sound, and that label wants to get behind the artist on a long-term basis and really help not just market the music, but really build the brand and get it on tour and have it do collabs with a lot of their other artists and like really build the brand into something. Then in that case, an exclusive deal can be great. It's just like with non-exclusive deals, you can always try something else. With exclusive deals, once you've signed on the line, you've done it. That's what it is, right? And you just want to make sure that if you do that and you sign away your music to a label for whatever the term is or whatever the music commitment is, you just want to really make sure that they have the same vision as you for your project and that they're as committed as you to bringing that project to life. Because otherwise you're just you're essentially tying your hands behind your back for no reason. I think exclusive deals can be very good, but it has to be the right deal.
Exactly. And that's why it's very, very, very important to read the fine print.
Right. And to have a lawyer. And I also wouldn't recommend signing an exclusive deal real early on in your career because you don't even know what type of music you want to be making yet. So that's like a really easy way of, let's say a big label really likes the music you're making now. So they sign you for your next 3 labels. But then you decide, I hate that genre. I'm going to switch to making drum and bass. That creates a really frustrating situation where the label doesn't want to release your music because it doesn't make any sense for their audience, but you don't want to make anything but drum and bass. So now you're trapped with this label. There's just a lot of if you don't have the same vision as a label, you really don't want to sign an exclusive deal because it's just going to cause problems down the road.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like I'm envisioning it like dating. You kind of want to, maybe when you're in your very younger years, you might want to kind of bounce around and go to different countries and date other people and kind of get a feel for everything and the cultures and how the markets are like. And then, maybe after 10 years, you've kind of bounced around and done all this dating with all these people. You might want to settle down somewhere, and you could do that comfortably and make a very, very informed decision as to why.
Yes. I got it. I have an even better analogy for you.
Go ahead.
Are you familiar with the show The Bachelor or The Bachelorette? Yes. So how at the end of the season they're supposed to get married or get engaged, right?
Right.
So I think The Bachelor is a perfect kind of reflection or a perfect analogy for signing an exclusive deal too early, right? So you go on The Bachelor and you have a month or 2 months or whatever to meet this person. And then they get married right at the end of the show, right? So after a month of being together, they get married. And I think the divorce rate for The Bachelor contestants is 90%, right? So it's look, really, really early on in the relationship, they got married and it didn't work, right? So it's realistically, you want to date for a couple years before you get married because then that the relationship is headed in the right way from both people's perspective, right? You don't want to get married before you actually know each other.
You don't want this to be a 90-day fiance relationship.
Exactly. You don't want to give the last person their rose and then get married that day because it could very well happen that you don't want the rose,
Right. But at the end of the day, you sign the paperwork, you're kind of stuck. It's easier to get out of a divorce than it is a label contract.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. They're both pretty shitty.
Yeah, they are both very shitty and can turn the wheels the wrong way on a lot of people.
Yes.
So bottom line, avoid it.
Yeah. And I would just say as an artist in general, don't ever sign something because someone's pressuring you to sign it. Just only sign something if you really, truly, A, understand it, and B, know it's the right decision in the long term. Not just like, oh, this will be good for me today, but in a month, I'm going to regret it, you know?
And I remember on my podcast with Davey, the lawyer, she said, she was telling about a story that there's this artist that came to her, and he had this, it was a big label that came to him and they wanted to sign him. And she said, I advised him, this is a horrible contract. Do not sign this deal. Do not sign it. And he signed it. And in a month or two, a couple, I don't know how long it was, but he came back and she's like, you signed it. I can't do anything now. But I don't remember what it was, and she probably couldn't go into a lot of detail about it. But she said it was a very bad deal, and it was like he wrote a bunch of albums, and he couldn't release them elsewhere, or he couldn't tour, or it was a very bad deal, and he signed it because he just had stars in his eyes. He just was so like over the moon excited that this was a major label that was
Sony
actually
responded to him or whatever.
Right. And like, yeah, we'll send you the contract, just sign it and get it back, and we'll get it released. Well. Not necessarily. And she's like, he came back to her and she kind of shrugged her shoulders and was like, yeah, there's nothing I can do at this point. So
the one thing that I will note on the subject of lawyers is, from my experience, from working on the management side, as well as on the label side, as well as just like consulting and kind of helping artists side, generally, a lawyer, like an entertainment lawyer that you bring in to look at a contract, they're far more likely to caution you against it than to suggest that you sign it. And, you know, obviously I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak as to why they do this. But my theory, and, you know, I have spoken to some and kind of like gotten some like insight and some perspective from some lawyers, but there's two things that a lawyer can do when you show them a contract, right? They can either tell you don't sign it, or they can tell you to sign it, or like that this is good to sign. Obviously, like they can go over all the points with you, but there's one of two paths: sign it or don't sign it. And if they say sign it and something goes wrong, that's their fault, right? And you're going to hold it against that lawyer that they got you to sign something that was bad, right? That's a huge liability for them. So if, on the other hand, they tell you don't sign it, nothing can go wrong from telling you to not sign it, right? You didn't sign it. You'll never know what would have happened if you had signed it. There's no liability to the lawyer there, right? So it's much safer for the lawyer to tell you not to sign it, because if you sign it and it goes wrong, they're kind of liable. They're culpable for that, right? You're going to hate them for that decision. If they tell you to don't sign it, then it's over. You know, they're not really liable for anything. You just won't ever know what could have happened. So from my experience, they're always more likely to find something to point out and say, don't sign it, than they are to like want to help make it work. So I don't really know what I'm saying here other than to say to artists, it's important to understand why a lawyer is telling you not to sign something, and also to not take what they say with a grain of salt, but to, you know, really appreciate their perspective and to take that knowledge on board, but to still make your own decision. And I know that the story that you just shared kind of points in the opposite direction, but, you know, there's always going to be anecdotes for both sides. And I would say don't just ignore your lawyer by any means, because they're there for a reason. But lawyers are always going to find things to nitpick to show you why they don't want you to sign it. And I'll give you a perfect example, right? So like I said before, we require that the artists assign us the copyright on both sides, right? They're still entitled to 50% of the royalties, publishing and master, but they assign the copyright to us. And the amount of lawyers that have read that and then said, yep, nope, we're never working with you, is very high. I've probably heard that 100 times, maybe more. And almost every one of those artists ended up releasing with us and being happy that they did. And it's just like lawyers see perpetuity. They see the word perpetuity. And because that evil word is in the agreement, they say, oh, no, don't sign this. There's a word that means forever in here, right? And so because that word has that stigma, they're now prevented from doing something that, at the end of the day, it's just that one track in perpetuity, right? So that would have been a really beneficial decision for that artist. But the lawyer sees the word perpetuity and thinks to themselves, if anything goes wrong forever now, because this is signed to them forever, if there's ever a problem here, the artist is going to come back and be pissed at me and tell people I didn't do my job and blah, 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 right? So they generally tend to be very conservative, and if they have any sort of questions or concerns at all, they'll just say, don't sign it. And from my experience, that's what happens a lot, and it does end up kind of making these artists miss out on opportunities that could have been good opportunities. Maybe not. Maybe some of them were really, restrictive, and it was good that the lawyer cautioned them against it. But I do think it is important to just keep that in mind. Like, what is the lawyer's incentive, right? Why are they saying this to me? Are they benefiting more, or are they in a better position if I don't sign this? Yes. Okay, well then I need to take that into consideration when I'm listening to their advice and when I'm making this decision. And that's why I said before, like, it's great to have a lawyer that understands all of this, and it's great to have a manager that understands all of this, but you're doing yourself a disservice by not at least understanding it on a basic level yourself, because then you're only making decisions that other people tell you to make.
In my eyes, signing a copyright over and the publishing over to a label with so much clout and respect as, say, EDM.com and Artist Intelligence Agency, that just, it's only one song. I mean, you could have a whole hard drive with 100 songs on it, and it's only one. In my opinion, if I had 100 songs and, say, 75 of them were in my best work, what harm would it do to sign one song? Just literally one. And they're going to push it, obviously, as hard as you can to get it, because if you don't, you just signed nothing, and you have a song in your catalog that's doing nothing.
Exactly. It's for us to sign something and then not do anything with it makes no sense, because I'm paying people to listen to the music and find stuff we want to sign, and then I'm paying someone to help the artist through the contracting process and explain the contract to them and collect the music and collect the artwork and collect all the assets and the acapella, and then another person to coordinate with our distributor and make sure all the music goes to retail, and then another person that handles playlisting. It's like, we're not going to be paying all those people to just sit on music and not do anything with it, right? Like, if you sign and commit to giving us one piece of music, we're going to commit to making that music as successful as possible. And then at the end of the day, if you're not happy, you just go to a different label with your next song, and you benefit from all the promotion that we did, but you can still move on and work with someone else.
Especially, like I said, you're only doing one song. It doesn't hurt to at least try it. You might like it, you might not. If you don't, like you said, if you don't like it, you just go to another label. If you do, you can go back and go back again.
Yeah, and that happens a lot too, where we have an artist that'll release with us, and then they'll say, yeah, my mom's real estate attorney told me that I shouldn't sign anything with the word perpetuity in it, so I'm going to go release with this other label. And then they do, and whatever happens, they just end up coming back and being like, oh, well, I don't really care that the word perpetuity is in there anymore, because I went to this label and, they just jerked me around for 6 months and we didn't end up releasing anything, so okay, I'm back.
It's funny how you say the word perpetuity is scary, because the word forever is kind of a scary word. Like, you won't own that song anymore. You won't have any control over that song. But at the same time, like you said, you might have 100 more. You got 100 more songs you have control over.
Right.
So it's like it doesn't hurt to take that stab in the dark, or just give it a whirl and try it out. And going back a little bit on your lawyer point, it is good to have a good lawyer and have a good understanding, because if you get a contract emailed to you, say, hey, sign this, we'll release it and do this and that, and you can, before you even forward it to your lawyer to check over, and you can see there's words that are misspelled, there's sentences that aren't complete, there's fragments, run-ons, periods, things that are capitalized, that is like a huge red flag, in my opinion. Like, these are just things that, like you said, Music 101 would teach you. Like, you should know what a sentence looks like. What does a sentence contain? A subject and a verb. This is basic English, 5th grade English. So if you can catch these things, that's kind of a red flag, because if a lawyer typed that, there should be full sentences, no fragments. And if it's a one-page contract saying, oh, you're going to get 50% of your royalties, 50% of what royalties?
Is the contract bullet points, or are there actual important clauses? Does it include the standard boilerplate clauses like indemnification and that type of stuff? Okay, good. Then they probably at least had a lawyer write it, right? It's not just something that some guy threw together for his YouTube channel. right?
Right.
So yes, there's absolutely having that base level of knowledge is really important, because then you don't have to pay for your lawyer's time, To read over a contract might take the lawyer an hour or two, and if they're charging $150, $200, $300, $400 an hour, you just blew $800 on a contract that you could have looked at yourself and said, they didn't even spell my artist name right. This is trash. You know what I mean? So yeah, having that base level experience, not only is it really beneficial and really not only does it put you in a much better position, it also is going to save you a lot of money. Because if you're an early stage artist, you're probably not making any money off of your music yet, right? So which means you're probably either, living at home still or in college or whatever, or you have another job that you're doing to support yourself while you're making music. And you don't want to be spending all of the money you're making on a lawyer, especially that early in your career, right? So just being able to know some basic stuff is really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And when Davey also said that I don't know if she had a client that had signed it or they had just basically gotten the contract and then took it right to her, where they were going to sign this contract or something, and they got it. Either somebody printed it out and sent it to them, or they printed it out and they were going to have somebody sign. I don't remember the exact stipulations, but she briefs over it and she goes, "Well, who's from Finland?" And they go, well, nobody. And she's like, "Yeah, it says here that somebody's from Finland."
It was like a contract for a different person or something.
It's either, I don't know if she said that they found it online and downloaded it, but it's if they were to sign that, there would be no jurisdiction here. You'd have to go to Finland to fight any claims about this. So it's just things like that. Why would you even go to her and like you said, pay that $200, $300, $400 just for her to tell you that ask you if anybody's from Finland?
Yeah, for one of the artists that I was kind of advising a couple years ago, they had a couple labels that approached them where they would send contracts, and it was really blatant that they found some sort of boilerplate recording contract online. Because if you scrolled through it, in most places, they replaced whatever the generic label name was with their label name, but you could find places where it said label _001, you know what I mean? Or publisher 12345 or artist X. And it's if they're doing that, and then that means they're not even sure what's in their contract, right? And if the label doesn't even know what they're sending you, you probably don't want to sign it,
No.
And if they have that little of attention to detail where they're sending you contracts with other people's names and stuff in it, you can obviously this isn't 100% for sure, but you can infer that if they're that sloppy with their contract, they're probably sloppy with everything, right? They're probably going to do a sloppy job with the artwork and with marketing it. And in general, it just shows a lack of attention to detail. And that type of thing is really important.
It absolutely is, especially in this industry where when you're getting down to royalty splits and copyrights and publishing deals and licenses and mechanical royalties, you have to be very, very, very detail-oriented. These things, you have to cross your T's and dot your I's.
Right, moving that decimal point one spot can make a big difference,
It can be the difference between $100 or $1,000 or $1,000 and $10,000. It's very important to be able to catch these things.
If that decimal point is in the recoupment amount, it can be the difference between you never making any money off of your release and you making a good amount of money off your release.
Very true. Very, very true.
Or if it's if you're paying out someone in a different country and the label doesn't withhold tax and the person doesn't know that they're supposed to, that could be tax evasion, right? And that's just another little detail that's just those are things that as the if you're the label and you're also handling all the administration and all the payouts, that's a huge liability, right? Handling all the accounting is a huge liability. You can get audited, you're holding all those artists' money in trust, and it's very important that you're detail oriented and you're not mixing up one artist's money with another artist's money. And there's a lot of little details that if they can't even put the right name on a contract, why would you trust them with the real details,
And your finances and potentially, paying the difference between paying your rent and being homeless,
Right. Literally.
Literally.
So
This is one of the few cases where it's appropriate to use literally.
Literally, yeah. Seriously, it really is. So I want to transition into kind of another strong point that you have is running a huge successful blog and one of the probably the most prolific in the industry, and I've been humbled to write for it for 2 years. Actually, this month, I believe, on March 8th is when I actually joined the
2-year club.
the 2-year club, absolutely.
That's awesome, man. I mean, it's been great having you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I've grown so much from it, and I've met so many amazing people, and the team has been so awesome, and the editors have been great, and it's been so good. So
awesome, man. It's really great to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite publications to write for, have written for. So I'm really humbled. So that comes to my next point is, in your opinion, I've heard numerous opinions from people. Are music blogs like EDM.com and other things, are they still relevant? Why is that? Or why aren't they? Do you think artists should still be reaching out to these publications? Do you think it's kind of a dying breed? Do you see them lasting in 10 years, 15 years?
Okay, well, there's a lot of questions there, so I'll try and break it down into some smaller points. But I think that one of the first things that we talked about was like the streaming music landscape, right? And how much things have how much things have changed in such a short period of time, meaning like the last 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. We'll just say the decade. And I think that there's a very close correlation with the advent and explosion of streaming music platforms and the life cycle of your average blog. And I say that because, let's go back in time to when I was DJing in college. So I graduated in 2007. So 2005, 2006, 2007. I found most of my music, if not all of my music, through music blogs and Hype Machine. I had a list of like 50 music blogs in a bookmark folder that I would go to every day, and I'd check all of them for new music. And then I'd go on Hype Machine every day, and I'd look under the different categories and, find the new remixes and search for different artist names that I liked and find their remixes, which, by the way, like Hype Machine was like the height of bootleg culture. But because the streaming platforms weren't so ubiquitous and didn't dominate the curation space, curators existed through blogs, right? So you would find a blogger or find a site that had similar taste to yours, and that would be where you'd get all your music, right? That was the source of your music. Now, everyone just has their favorite playlist on Spotify, or their favorite, Trap Nation or Proximity, their favorite YouTube channel. And so that, like, the need for that curator has disappeared in a lot of ways because streaming platforms kind of took over curation. You don't need to read some random kid's opinions about the music. You can just listen to the music, right? And I think that a reason that a lot of the blogs just disappeared so quickly when that curational role wasn't necessary anymore is because no one cared about those people's opinions, right? They weren't professional writers. They weren't music critics. For the most part, they were just kids like me at the time. And by the way, I'm not dissing these people or trying to put them down at all, because that was me. My blog, Subsynthesis, is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, I wasn't particularly educated to write about music. I mean, I'm a pretty good writer, but like, why should some random person in another state who likes similar music care what I wrote about the music, right? And I just think that culture, to a big extent, kind of fell apart when officially curated playlists kind of took their place, right? Because rather than listening to what some random person thinks about this song, they just have a list curated by professionals of all the music they should listen to. It's kind of like radio in the sense that, like, for some people, it's easier just to be told what they should be listening to, right? And so I think that's one part, is like the lack of professional journalism and the fact that it was mostly just kind of curators without even much writing. It was kind of just like updates with music. There's just no room for that anymore in the music landscape, right? Why would you need a little, one of the ones I went to was like Mahogany Blog, and I think Pigeons and Planes is still around, but they're very different from what they used to be. But they were just like, they would write like a couple sentences and then have a SoundCloud embed, right? And now people just go right to where the music is. That said, I do think there's still a place for music media companies and music journalism. I just think it's a lot of the chaff was cut out, so to speak. Like a lot of just like the hobbyist stuff, they realized that you can't really make money off of a hobby blog. So now there's a couple left. There's EDM.com, there's DJ Mag, there's Rolling Stone, there's Spin, and there's Yuri DM. And I mean, I think Dancing Astronaut is still putting out a good amount of content. I haven't heard that much about them recently, but it's really just the ones that actually have some form of like professional journalism in place. Like they actually have an editor, and there's actually writers that, you know, are not just college students, but are people actually pursuing careers in the music business and actually have like, you're a perfect example. You're not a random college student. You're actually, you know, you have your own content that you're creating. You're talking to lots of different experts in the space. All of the content you write isn't just like, hey, check out this cool banger. You're writing about, you're informing people about important issues, right?
I hate the word banger.
How about this shit's lit? Or this song slaps.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've tweeted about it before. Like the word banger should not be in any professional, air quote, journalism blog. I just think it's so overused, and it's like the, oh, I don't have anything to say about this. It's a banger. Oh, this song, it's the kick is good and the bass really sits nicely and the synths, I mean, that means it's a banger. You know, it's like that's not a good adjective.
I agree. Writing about music is really hard.
It really is. There's only so many things you can say about.
So any word that you use to describe a style of music, once that style becomes sort of like ubiquitous, then the term that you use to describe it is already like a trope. You know what I mean? So it's because it's so hard to describe something that really is beyond words in a lot of ways, that kind of becomes a thing where like someone is like, oh, I'm going to use this word. And then other people are like, oh, well, I never knew how to describe it, so I'm just going to use the word that guy used. And it just kind of, you know, snowballs from there. So I understand why it happens, because it's hard to come up with words to describe. Like, I don't know, how else would you describe a banger? It's a banger. It bangs. You know what I mean? So... yeah. Yes, I do think that is lazy journalism in a lot of ways. And that just feeds back into what I was saying before. You know, the couple media companies and, you know, magazines and whatnot, the couple that are still around are the ones that weren't just hobby blogs. They're actual professional media entities that do more than really basic song reviews. There's just no place for that anymore. People want their news. They want interesting features that like talk about, that inform them about something important. People just want real information about real issues and about real events that they might want to go to. And just like the fluff pieces are not as interesting, and there's just no real space for them anymore. Your last question was, will they still be around in 10 years? I have no idea. I wish I knew, but I have no clue. I will say that, in general, websites in general have become much harder to monetize over the last couple years. Really going back even 10 years, like, there was a period where, you know, when there were crazy pop-up ads and Googlebot DoubleClick and like banners were at the kind of peak of their value, where you could do nothing but run banners on a relatively high traffic site and make a killing. And then that kind of slowly, as programmatic advertising got really big and like everyone just started using Google AdSense and other similar kind of like waterfall advertising, that became like very much like pennies on the dollar. And it started to kind of move into a phase where you had to start to do some pay-to-play type stuff. Like people would pay you for reviews, or events would pay you for advertising. And then, you know, a bunch of rules came in about that where you had to disclose things as sponsored content. And so, you know, then that started happening. And then, you know, influencer marketing became a big thing. So then all the big platforms decided to start Instagrams and do, you know, have people pay for stories. And there's always, as old methods for drawing in revenue phase out, new ones come in. So I would say one of the biggest hits to the industry was when Facebook started really throttling organic traffic. That was a big hit because a lot of the blogs got the vast majority of their traffic from Facebook. And I definitely remember that when that happened, and remember seeing a big drop in traffic and us having to really figure out, okay, what's our next step? How do we get around this drastic change? And then the other, I would say, big change, which wasn't as much like overnight kind of change. It's more of something that slowly sort of kind of took over was the internet used to be like somewhere where you would go to destinations, right? So a destination is a website. You would go to edm.com or golf.com, or you'd type in whatever website you wanted to go to, right? Now most people either search what they're trying to go to on Google, or they just find whatever they're looking for on social media, right? So the idea of like the destination homepage is very, very like almost non-existent. Very few people type in an address and go to that website, which means that homepages get almost no traffic, right? So when people go to our site, they largely come from Google News. So like, let's say, Tomorrowland announced their lineup today, and we were the first people to post the Tomorrowland lineup. Anyone that searches Tomorrowland on Google that day will find our article at the top, right? So we get a lot of traffic from that. We get a lot of traffic from posting articles on Facebook. We get a lot of traffic from doing swipe up stories on Instagram, but no one just goes to the homepage, right? But that's how the internet used to work. People used to go to homepages. So many websites nowadays are designed to have these really pretty like homepages and landing pages, but in a lot of cases, no one ever sees them because they end up just going straight to the articles, either through Google News or through Facebook or whatever else. So that's a big change too. Like a lot of the big newspaper sites, like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and all of those, if you went to their homepages like 5-6 years ago, it looked like a newspaper on a website, right? But now it's just all headlines that's essentially formatted in a way where when you're on your phone, you can just swipe up and see a bunch of headlines go by, right? And that's just because no one really goes to destinations anymore. People go right to the content. So all of those different things have definitely contributed to changing and making it a more difficult industry in some ways. But unless there's like a drastic change to the way the internet works, or to the way, you can monetize written content, unless there's like some pretty significant unforeseen change, I think these types of media platforms will still exist. I just don't know what form that will be.
Interesting.
Like the internet could be all virtual reality then, where like you actually walk into a door and it's an edm.com building and like there's artists hanging out inside the building. Like who knows?
That's interesting. Or you can somehow read articles in virtual reality, or
have your favorite artist read the article to you.
There you go. Like
I think we should close this off, and we should start brainstorming ideas on virtual reality.
Perfect. That sounds great. Yeah. We'll make our next session about virtual reality and music.
Virtual reality, music, and the future of the internet and journalism.
Yes.
So that's an interesting point, because when, for example, like people can come to me and like, hey, did you read that story about, Tomorrowland announcing their lineup, or EDC announcing their lineup, or did you hear where their Miami Music Week is going to be at? And no, I didn't. Well, where did you hear it from? Oh, I don't know. I found it on Instagram.
Right.
Or I don't know. I saw it on Twitter. They don't know the source.
Exactly. Even though that source was someone sharing an article from edm.com.
Exactly. Like it could have been an article from edm.com, but maybe somebody just shared it on, maybe EDC shared it on their Instagram story.
Exactly. Everything is so decentralized.
Right. And nobody knows the source of anything. They're just like, they just read it because they don't really care where the source is. They just want to quickly get to the information and then leave. That's it. And it's interesting that you said that, because I do that. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, this is interesting. I quickly brief through it, and I
of course, you'd be a weirdo if you didn't do it, right?
Right. You probably would. You're like, yeah, I read the whole thing. I read everything. I clicked every link, and I read the articles there, and nobody does that. They just read, they get the information they need, and they leave. They don't really take note of...
Right. It's what you think about when you when you go and visit your parents, right? And they watch the entire 9 News at 9 for an hour. They sit through the news for an hour and a half, and it's the same stories from the day before. And it's like, how can you do that when you can just scroll through, the Huffington Post page and see all those headlines and not need to listen to this random actor talk about the news,
Right. Or, maybe they wanted to find a story like, oh, yeah, there's this new actress just got married and I really wanted to see how the wedding went. Well, why don't you just go on Huffington Post and find clips of their wedding? Because I'm sure you could, TMZ, I'm sure you could find clips of it somewhere and get the information you need, rather than sitting through all this extra negative bullshit that the news always shares.
Right, exactly.
That's an interesting point. That was really interesting. I never really kind of thought of it that way, and made me think that, oh yeah, that's true. Like nobody really goes to the homepage. Like if I'm looking for, like Tomorrowland's lineup, like you had said, I'm just going to Google it, and whichever one's first or second or third, that's the one I'm going to click. I don't really care what source it is.
Exactly, because brand loyalty, especially to websites, is like not really a thing anymore. It used to be like I had very strong brand loyalty to Mahogany Blog, for example. Like it represented my music tastes in a lot of ways. And like if people asked me where I got my music, I would say, oh, I follow this guy's taste because he likes amazing music. But you never say like, oh yeah, I get my music taste from Spotify. Like that doesn't mean anything. And so it's just interesting now that like people get their music from a nameless source, and that in a way is better than getting it from a person, because it feels like you discovered it on your own as opposed to following someone else and just enjoying their taste in music. Even though really all of the playlists are like algorithmically curated and it's all designed to keep you in the platforms and in the streaming platforms as long as possible. Like it's not really to your benefit, it's to their benefit, which is why they did it. It seems like it's a more organic discovery process. Mm-hmm. And people like that. People like feeling like they're in control, even if the actual level of control they have is diminished. It's more the perception that matters.
Plus, I feel like their neglect to actually take note of the actual source of where they found the song or the news makes them more, like you said, in power. Like, oh, yeah, like I know who's going to be on Tomorrowland. Well, where'd you find it? I don't know. I just read it somewhere. Whereas if you just say you read it somewhere, your friend may not know. They don't care where you got, like, oh, where'd you get the source? Like, they don't care. It's like, wow, he's really smart. It sounds like he's got inside information. Like, no, you just read it somewhere, but you neglecting to kind of take note of the platform can be like, oh, I know what this information is.
Right. And in some way, it's really cool that people have the ability to kind of harness that level of power. On the other side, it's really horrible because it's what allows like fake news to become such a powerful thing, Yeah.
So how can the listeners follow you and kind of keep up with you? Or if they have any questions on something you had said in the show, how can they follow up with you and ask you?
Sure. So on Instagram, I'm Ethan M. Baer, ETHAN MBAER. Same thing on SoundCloud, same thing on Facebook.
Perfect. I will put all of your links and stuff in the show notes below as well, so people can just click and go. Got to make it easy for them. So thanks again for being on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I do apologize. We did go over quite a bit, but we had such a great conversation, so thanks again.
Oh, I don't mind at all. I had a great time, and anytime you need anything else, just let me know, and I look forward to hearing this.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. I hope you enjoyed Ethan and I's conversation about the major labels, the inner workings of how EDM.com, an artist intelligence agency, works, and our discussion on if blogs and electronic music publications such as EDM.com will be around in 5-10 years. I thought that was kind of an interesting point on how he talked about, brand awareness is not what it used to be. You don't really go directly to the website to find out information. You kind of just search for something like we had talked about Tomorrow World or Tomorrowland's lineup, and you just kind of pick the first one that comes to mind because we're always in such a hurry and we just want the information quickly and as efficiently as possible. So going to a website and then scrolling through, it's not efficient, it's not time effective. And I thought that was a very interesting point that he had made, because we just ingest content so quickly these days. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Mr. Ethan Baer, and I encourage you to sign up to my mailing list, as it helps me notify you when new episodes like this are live, as well as supporting me on Patreon, as it helps me kind of work with you, and then the money that I make through Patreon will go directly back into the show to make it better for all of you. And I would also really appreciate a 5-star rating and review within Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you use to listen to your podcasts on, because it greatly helps the show be discovered by new listeners and help it grow our community. And lastly, there is the guest request form. So if you or somebody you know would be a good guest for the show, please fill it out and or send it over to your friend and have them fill it out, and I'd be more than happy to reach back out to them or you if you are a good fit for the show. So thanks again for tuning into this week's episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. I hope you enjoyed the conversation this week, and I have an equally as exciting conversation for you next week on When Life Hands You Lemons.